October 4th, 1967. Something unusual is happening in the skies over the Canadian province of Nova Scotia. During the waning hours of the evening, dozens of people are confounded by a series of inexplicable lights in the sky. It's a date that will later become known as the Night of the UFOs.
It was a clear night, the stars were out.
It was a cold night, there was a light wind. A beautiful night.
At 10 p.m. in the town of Dartmouth, 12-year-old Chris Stiles is getting ready for bed and takes one last look out his bedroom window. He is dumbfounded at what he sees.
I saw a strange orange light that was moving along the shoreline, and it was like nothing I'd ever seen. It was dim and hard to discern any detail. So I quickly grabbed my jacket, ran out the front door, and went down to the waterfront to get a better look. I knew in my life, at 12 for the first time, what real fear was.
Stiles' encounter with the UFO is only the prelude to a flurry of sightings that explode throughout Nova Scotia that night. 1 hour later, the small fishing village of Shag Harbour on the southern tip of the peninsula begins to erupt with similar sightings. 18-year-old fisherman Laurie Wickens is driving home with 3 friends when something odd in the sky catches his attention.
We was on our way to Woods Harbour, and through Shag Harbour, just past the post office, we happened to look out through the window and we see a light, and there was 2 on, then 3 on, and there was 4 on. It seemed to be flying along like just level, a yellowish orangish colour, I guess the colour of the lights was.
It's now slightly before midnight. 2 fishing boats with several volunteers motor out towards open water at full throttle. Crisscrossing patterns of searchlight beams paint the dark, still waters of the harbor as the search begins.
And what we were doing was looking for something on the water, debris is what we were thinking.
The mood on the boats is tense as the would-be rescuers brace themselves for a grisly scene of floating body parts and plane wreckage.
We were out there pretty near all night and circling around and looking for anything else that was on the water, any debris or anything, and we never found nothing. There was not so much as a tin can.
They realized that this is not a downed aircraft, none are missing. They're looking for something unconventional. They're starting to realize that perhaps this is some unknown object from space.
The residents are certain that something fell into the dark waters of Shag Harbour, but no one seems to know what it is. Reports came in from witnesses from all over Nova Scotia that night. At 7:15 p.m. on October 4th, 1967, 2 pilots on Air Canada Flight 305 are flying at an altitude of 12,000 feet over southeastern Quebec. Captain Pierre Charbonneau and First Officer Robert Ralph glance out of the left cockpit window and see something astounding.
What they saw that night was a large, round, colored object in the sky that looked like, to them, like a kite with a tail on it. It was off their left wing and just slightly above their altitude.
The experienced pilots are at a loss. They observe the strange shape for several minutes when suddenly they see a series of explosions. According to their testimony, they begin to take evasive action when the UFO disappears into a wisp of clouds. After some deliberation, the pilots decide to file official reports about the bizarre occurrence.
Incident that I'm relating takes place during the early morning of October the 4th, 1967. We departed JFK, and shortly after takeoff and during the climb, the 2 extra pilots went back to their bunks to rest, and we were going to be dividing up the rest time during the night, so we'd each get a break from our duties. We had recently climbed to our cruising altitude of, I believe it was 33,000 feet, because it was on a 707 freighter, fully loaded. We couldn't get much higher early on in the flight. And in the right seat was Ralph Loewinger, who has been my friend for more than 50 years now. And in the left seat was Captain Kurt Olsen, who I flew with before, and I think once or twice after this incident. We were at cruising altitude, an hour or so out of Kennedy. We had just gone by Boston, and we were being controlled by Boston radar, and about to be transitioning over to Canadian air traffic control, when Ralph noticed a series of lights at approximately our 11 o'clock position, and what appeared to be at our altitude. And there were 5 lights, and they were not actually level with the horizon. They appeared to me to be at about a 15 to 20 degree angle, which would indicate to us that there was an airplane with its landing lights on in a right bank, making a right turn, and would shortly turn away from our flight path. This did not happen. The lights remained in a steady position at around 11 o'clock, but they appeared to be getting closer and not turning away from our flight path. Ralph initiated a series of conversations with the Boston radar, asking about the presence of possible conflicting traffic, and this was adamantly denied by Boston. He had us score our identification, positively identifying our airplane, and he said to us that that the closest traffic to our position was in the 3 to 4 o'clock position and many miles away. So he was not seeing on his radar what we were seeing with our eyes. As this object began to get closer to our airplane, Captain Olsen asked me to go to the back of the airplane, right outside the cockpit door, and awake the 2 pilots who were resting and bring them back into the cockpit. So that there were now 5 people in the cockpit of the 707. I did that, and I did it pretty quickly because I wanted to get back into the cockpit. I was feeling a certain amount of apprehension at the time, and I didn't want to spend much time away from flight deck. The other guys came in and they took their seats, so they actually were standing, I believe, at this point in time. And what was happening then was that the object was getting closer and closer to our flight with our airplane. Captain Olsen was also getting involved in the radio transmissions with Boston, as he was himself anticipating something that wasn't quite right, and he was getting ready to get his airplane out of our cruising altitude. I went into the left observer's seat, right behind the captain's seat, where there's a large window on the 707, so I had a very good vision of what was transpiring off the left side of the airplane. And as this object came closer to our flight, I began to realize that it was of a tremendous size. It was the biggest thing I've ever seen in the sky, and I could see it outlined by the diffuse lighting from the lights along the east coast of the U.S. as we were flying up towards Canada. What I saw was, I realized that what we thought initially were 5 lights, possibly landing lights on an airplane, I was looking into a lighted object, like looking into a building which was lighted on the inside, and I'm on the outside in the darkness looking through a window. I didn't see anything in the window. It was just a pale yellow light, but definitely illumination. And the object began to move closer to our airplane. Not at any kind of rapid closure, but just very slowly it began to come very close to the 707. Is it possible to anticipate or to estimate how far away it was? But it was definitely in a position that seemed to me to be threatening to our flight. Captain Olson, being of the same opinion, he finally said to us, he says, guys, I'm going to disconnect the autopilot and we're going to start a descent. I'm getting out of here. And as soon as he said those words, this object began to move away from our airplane. It stopped moving closer. It started to move further away to the left. It then proceeded at the same altitude to slowly accelerate away from our airplane. And then it proceeded with a tremendous acceleration that I'd never seen anything like that before. And it climbed at an angle probably about 45 degrees, and it accelerated until it actually disappeared, as I remember, in a flash of light as it climbed into the upper atmosphere and disappeared. So that's what I saw. On these long flights, pilots usually sleep is everything, right? You want to get out of that seat and get in the back and get into your bunk and have a couple of hours rest on a long transatlantic flight. No one left the cockpit that night. We all sat there in awe of what had happened, and I actually felt that we had escaped, some serious injury or mid-air collision or whatever. And we spent the rest of that evening, or I did that night, looking for this thing to return and finish what it had started, but we never saw anything again. But many years later, we discovered that on that same evening in Shag Harbour, Nova Scotia, one of the residents of that town had seen a UFO, an object, descend into the ocean and disappear into the depths of the ocean. There are books written about it. There are eyewitness accounts. I don't know what they saw. What I saw was nothing that like what they saw. They saw something that was fairly small, I guess. What I saw was something bigger than a cruise ship. So that's my story. That's what I saw 50 years ago. And I saw something, and Ralph did, and so did Kurt Olson. Kurt has passed away now, so we can't consult with him. And both Ralph and I cannot remember or find the other two crew members who were on that flight with us in October 1967.